Since ancient times, civilizations and communities have established legal and ethical systems to maintain order and social harmony. It could be a great civilization like Indus Valley civilization or the Mesopotamian civilization, or even a tribal community in a jungle. Everybody had their set of established legal and ethical systems in one way or another to maintain order and social harmony. In Bharat, the roots of law and governance trace back to the Vedic Corpus, the four Vedas, and especially Atharva Veda, which laid the foundation of Dharma. Dharma is a concept encompassing righteousness, justice, duty, and moral order. Dharma was not merely some religious activity or some legal system, but it's a way of life, integrating the ethical responsibilities at personal level with the social governance at a state level. That is Dharma, for which we have Dharma Sutras given by the great Rishi Muni lineage like Apastamba Dharma Sutras, Gautama Dharma Sutras, Bauddhayana Dharma Sutras, and Vasistha Dharma Sutras. Each of the Dharma Sutras focus on a specific domain. We'll not get into the Dharma Sutras for the moment, at least not in this video. I already covered that in my previous videos. From Dharma Sutras emerged the Dharma Shastras, which provided structured legal and moral codes for society, emphasizing duties, justice, and righteous rule. Parallelly, the Niti Shastras focused on practical governance, diplomacy, and statecraft. These texts offered rulers strategies for administration, resource management, and maintaining stability, peace, and order across the kingdoms in the history of Bharat. This is the baseline understanding that we need to have. And certain examples for Dharma Shastras are like Parashara Smriti, Vishnu Smriti, Vyasa Smriti, Brihaspati Smriti, Manusmriti, Narada Smriti, Yajnavalkya Smriti, so on and so forth. And Niti Shastras are like Vidura Niti, Shukra Niti, Brihaspati Niti, and so on. And just in case if you are thinking that all these are archaic scriptures and are irrelevant today, to a certain extent, yes, but the fundamentals of the legal system that we have in Bharat, which was devised by the British back then, Dharma Shastras played a significant role in shaping up the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, what we have today. That's a long history. We'll not go into that, but just worth a mention. So the current topic that we have, Chanakya's Artha Shastra, it falls in a way under Niti Shastras. Not exactly so, but more or less it falls under Niti Shastras. And here I just tried to give you a very high level classification of Dharma Shastras and Niti Shastras. It's quite difficult to draw a line between these two, but just for ease of expression, Dharma Shastras focus on the religious and legal aspects of things, while Niti Shastras focus on political and administrative elements. And Chanakya's Artha Shastra, that's where it sits. Just to give you a holistic view on where is the position of Chanakya's Artha Shastra, I gave a lengthy introduction. Now let's get into the actual topic, what's written in Chanakya's Artha Shastra. The opening words of Artha Shastra, written by Chanakya, also called as Kautilya or Vishnugupta. The opening words are like this: Om Namah Shukra Brihaspati Bhyam. He starts Artha Shastra by offering salutations and oblations to Devaguru Brihaspati and Rakshasaguru Shukracharya. And this one line in a way reflects the essence of the entire book. From atrocious and crooked strategies all the way till ethical and social governance, it has it all. But in the frame of Dharma. That is very important to understand. In summary, Chanakya's Artha Shastra is a culmination of Deva Niti on ethical and moral grounds, as well as Rakshasa Niti on ruthlessness, both perfectly balancing in the circle of Dharma as per the context, space, and time. Now, without any further delay, let's get into the core contents of Artha Shastra. Sarva Shastra Anukramya Prayogam Upalabhya cha Kautilyena Narendre Shasanasya Vidhikrutaha. Having thoroughly examined all scriptures and having understood their practical application, Kautilya laid down the legal principles in the domain of kingship. These are the words of Kautilya himself in the Artha Shastra. The biggest misconception about Artha Shastra is clarified with this one slokam. A very popular opinion about Chanakya's Artha Shastra is that it reflects the polity and the statecraft of the times that Chanakya lived. That is fundamentally incorrect. It is not a historical text. It is a treatise. It's like an encyclopedia of statecraft, but it is not reflecting the real-world situations of the times of Kautilya. It is quite clear in this one slokam itself. Kautilyena narendre shasanasya vidikkrutaha. For the kings to rule efficiently, Kautilya composed this Artha Shastra. Yes, it may have elements that reflected the real world of the times back then, or may not. In essence, it is an encyclopedia of statecraft. So clarifying that very important misconception, let us get into the contents. Chanakya's Artha Shastra has 15 chapters in both poetry and prose formats, spread across all these 15 chapters in different sections throughout the scripture. So let's see what are in each of these 15 chapters. Starting with the first one, Vinayadhikaranam, the discipline of a king. This chapter deals with aspects like how should a king rule? How do you manage wealth and warcraft? How do you really balance the power behind the throne? Because power structure is different, org structure is different. How do you manage the power structure that's fueling the throne or keeping the throne strong? How do you divide and conquer and unite? How do you manage your heirs and the hidden threats within the enemies, as well as in your own people? And how should a king rule? In Chanakya's language, rule like a sage, act like a king. Discipline of the king is what Vinayadhikaranam, the first chapter of Kautilya's Artha Shastra, elaborates. The second chapter of Artha Shastra is Adhyaksha Pracharam. It talks about the duties of government representatives. The government representatives in Artha Shastra bear crucial responsibilities. They must develop villages into fortresses, ensure economic stability by managing revenue and preventing corruption, and uphold the law by supervising officials and enforcing order, overseeing mines, treasuries, and war resources, strengthening the kingdom, while regulating trade ensures fair commerce. Even leisure activities like liquor and gambling fall under state control, according to Chanakya. The third chapter of Artha Shastra is Dharmastiyam. Talks about contracts, law, family and trade. Laws of trust and trade, agreements, debts, deposits, rightful ownership, marriage and morality, inheritance and lineage, land and property disputes, labor and livelihood, crime and punishment, vice and its consequences. These are the topics for Dharmastiyam. One of the contemporary topics in public discourse about divorce and alimony, it's so well narrated by Kautilya in this chapter, where divorce is defined as in a very gender-neutral manner, which probably Indian courts should learn from Artha Shastra, at least on this atrociously biased laws on divorce and alimony. What also caught my attention while going through this chapter is we were taught in our schools that widow remarriage was some sort of a great thing that Raja Ram Mohan Roy or somebody else introduced into the Indian systems, right? That is absolutely incorrect. In this chapter of Dharmastiyam in Artha Shastra, Kautilya clearly mentions how and when can a widow get remarried thousands of years ago. Widow remarriage, very well encoded in Artha Shastra, chapter 3, Dharmastiyam. Having said that, I don't intend to say that whatever Kautilya written in Artha Shastra is relevant for us today. No, that's not my point. There are many other aspects which are not compatible with the times that we are living in. But widow remarriage and gender agnostic divorce laws, quite inspirational for someone like Kautilya to think some thousands of years ago, right? That's definitely an inspiration. The fourth chapter of the Artha Shastra is Kamtaka Shodhanam. Talks about protection from exploitation, safeguarding citizens from the artisans and merchants, criminal prevention and investigation, seizing the criminals, serving justice and investigation, government protection, punishments and legal violations. These aspects are part of Kamtaka Shodhanam. The fifth chapter is Yoga Vrittam. It's about interpretation of law. How do you manage your treasury and wealth? How do you enable support for the government officials, the courtiers' conduct, strategic alliances, how to forge them in both wartime and peacetime? And how do you strengthen the kingdom and its sovereignty? And the sixth chapter is Mandala Yoni, which deals with sovereignty of a state. It explains the foundations of sovereignty, understanding the key elements that define and sustain the independence of the king and a kingdom. And then how do you balance it with peace and war times? How do you synchronize your strategic alliances to maintain that balance of sovereignty both in war times and peace times? The seventh chapter is Shadgunyam, or the sixfold policy of diplomacy strategy. The first one is peace, Sandhi, entering a treaty or agreement to avoid conflict. Second is war, Vigraha, engaging in direct conflict when necessary. Third one is neutrality, Asana, remaining passive and observing rather than taking action. Fourth is marching, Yana, preparing for or advancing towards war. Fifth is alliance, Samarasya, seeking protection or forming a coalition with another power. And the sixth one is dual policy, Dvaivid Bhava, making peace with one state while waging war with another. The six-fold diplomacy strategy. Very well thought. And just maybe I want to digress for a minute on this part. When Bharat is called as Vishwaguru, there is nothing you and me can claim credit for it. Absolutely not. It's about these kind of bright minds. Just imagine some thousands of years ago, how do you really need to shape your thoughts in the frame of diplomacy as part of statecraft, which is very valid even today. This is the reason Bharat is praised as Vishwaguru. Of course, we are far from calling ourselves that, and I don't believe that current India the way we are least qualified to be called as Vishwaguru. That's a different story. The credit goes to people like Chanakya. The 8th chapter is Vyasanadhikaram. It deals with addictions and the calamities. Addictions of king, problems with different addictions that a king might have and their implications on the state. Troubles of the king and the kingdom. Troubles of men, the economic hardships, social unrest, molestations, obstructions and financial troubles. How to deal with all these kinds of situations. Troubles of the army and the friends, military issues and complications and alliances. All these are mentioned in the 8th chapter, Vyasanadhikaram. The 9th chapter of Artha Shastra is Akramana, strategies for invasion. How do you plan an invasion? What is the optimal moment and the strategic understanding needed for a successful invasion? Army recruitment. How do you assemble and mobilize the forces? Managing rear threats. Addressing potential disturbances or threats from behind. Impact of losses, considering the consequences of losing soldiers, wealth and other resources during an invasion. Assessing the threats, evaluating the risks from enemies and other internal traitors. Financial risks for invasion. When you go for an invasion, how do you keep the ball rolling in your own kingdom financially? All these aspects as a precursor to the invasion. It's more of planning for an invasion. That's not the 9th chapter, Akramana, strategies for invasion. The 10th chapter of Artha Shastra is Sangramikam. It is executing the invasion. Encampment, focusing on setup and organization of different military camps. Marching the camp, moving with your forces into the enemy territory. Forms of treacherous fights, battlefield operations with the four forces, infantry, cavalry, chariots and elephants. Distinctive array of troops, that is the battle formations, the strategic battle formations that you find in Mahabharata and all. And then it's all about how do you break into your enemy territory, execute the invasion and conquer the lands. That is the 10th chapter of Artha Shastra, Sangramikam. The 11th and 12th chapters of Artha Shastra deals with spy operations and stealth attacks. The 11th one is Sangavrittam and the 12th one is Abaliyasam. These chapters deal with how do you find a traitor on the enemy side. How do you sow the divisions? How do you manipulate the relationships so that you can turn one person against the another in the enemy camp? How do you find the weak links in your enemy side? How do you break relationships to emotionally destroy the enemy from the within? How do you initiate disputes in the family of or in the close quarters of your enemy king? Interestingly, Kautilya gives a step-by-step approach on how can you kill the enemy king through the enemy queen. A very detailed psychological operation, so on and so forth. And then how do you kill the commander-in-chief? What kind of weapons that spies need to carry? How do you capture the enemy in different situations and different kinds of tactics that you need to use? So on and so forth. Chapter 13, Durgalambopayam, breaking the enemy from inside. This chapter talks about how do you recruit your spies, how do you place your spies, how do you use women as a bait to capture your enemy, how do you break into the fortress of your enemy, how do you restore peace in a conquered territory. Interestingly, Kautilya focuses more on the psychological operations and manipulations and diplomacy more than an aggressive warfare. He focuses more on the subtler, technical and incredibly powerful techniques where without invasion you can break your enemy and conquer your territories or your objectives. The 14th chapter of Artha Shastra is all about post-war recovery, means to injure an enemy, delusive contrivances, remedies against injuries of one's own army. How do you basically recover from a war and bring your army up to the normal levels of defense to secure your border walls post-war? And 15th and the last chapter of Artha Shastra deals with psyops, psychological operations, the use of different kinds of tactics like fear, misinformation and persuasion to weaken or control enemies and the subjects and to influence the political and military outcomes. This is again, like I said, a non-violent yet hard-hitting psychological operations onto your enemy. Now that's in brief about the 15 chapters of Chanakya's Artha Shastra or Vishnugupta's Artha Shastra. Vishnugupta also authored Panchatantra. It's the same person who authored both Artha Shastra and Panchatantra. As I said, Kautilya is the name given to him because of his Gotra, and Chanakya is the name given to him because of his father Chanaka. As a son of Chanaka, he is called as Chanakya. But his actual given name as an individual is Vishnugupta, and he is the one who authored both Panchatantra as well as Artha Shastra. Panchatantra, as what we all know or learned in our childhood, is a lot different from the reality. The actual Panchatantra text, if you see, it is completely a very toned down version of the Artha Shastra. It is completely about statecraft, public administration, policy making and all, but in a very subtle format through fictitious stories where animals talk to each other. As the name itself says, Pancha, 5, Tantra means techniques. Let's quickly try to understand what are those 5 techniques that Vishnugupta authored as part of Panchatantra. The first chapter is Mitra Bedha. How can friendships put you in troubles and make your life difficult? This chapter demonstrates how manipulation, deceit and false accusations cause rifts, leading to a breakdown of friendships and alliances. The stories show the consequences of betrayal and highlight the importance of trust in relationships. The second chapter is Mitra Labha, how friendships can pull you out of troubles and make your life easy. This chapter explores the value of trust, loyalty and cooperation in building meaningful relationships. Through stories of animals demonstrating mutual support, it emphasizes the power of working together against adversity, illustrating how the alliances and friendships can prosper. The third chapter is Kakaulukiyam. This chapter talks about the political strategies used in conflict. It focuses on a war between crows and owls, showcasing diplomacy, cunning tactics, and alliances to outmaneuver foes. This chapter advises on navigating conflict with strategy and wisdom, how to control your wits during war and peace times, defending your place and position. As you can already observe, Artha Shastra and Panchatantra, they run in parallel. Just that Artha Shastra is at a PhD level and Panchatantra is at a primary school level. Still talking about the same subject all along. The fourth chapter of Panchatantra is Labdha Pranasham. This chapter talks about, or rather warns, that the greed, carelessness and overconfidence, how can they lead to losing what one has worked to acquire? It underscores the need for vigilance and prudence in safeguarding your gains. Simply put, how to realize the true value of what you have already done in your life. That is Labdha Pranasham. The fifth and the last chapter of Panchatantra is Aparikshita Karakam. This chapter highlights the perils of impulsive decisions or hasty decisions. The chapter cautions that the actions taken without thorough thought or analysis often result in unintended and negative consequences. So basically this chapter is all about how not to make hasty decisions in life that leaves you with regret. The relevance of Panchatantra for the times that we live in, or even some 1,000 years from now, it is absolutely unchangeable because it hits the very basics of a human life. More than 2,500 years of legacy in 200 versions of Panchatantra translated into 50 languages over this 2,500 years period. Carved on stones, manuscripts in the museums, many temples, we can see the stories of Panchatantra carved on the stones. It shows how deeply Panchatantra is ingrained into the culture of Bharat. And more importantly, Panchatantra is not just a comical storybook. If you really get into the Panchatantra, the actual stuff, there's a lot of blood and gore and violence as well. Because the basic idea is to teach the statecraft, public administration, strategic alliances in both war and peace times. And naturally, there is a lot of violence, blood and gore that you can really experience if you read the actual Panchatantra, which is not meant for kids, but the real one. But of course, as kids, we all enjoyed Panchatantra a lot, and I'm sure a lot of us have this nostalgia with Panchatantra. Panchatantra is one of the most widely translated texts of Indian origin. I just tried to make a map of this. We don't even know when it was written. I'll not get into the dates of when Chanakya lived and when Alexander invaded India. There is a lot of debate on the chronology, so I'll not get into that. So leaving that aside, we don't even know in which year it was written, Panchatantra. Definitely, of course, in BC. But then it is translated into Pahlavi, Arabic, Greek, Spanish, English, Italian, French and German languages. As you can see, it traveled to the west over the last 2,000 years. Coming all the way back to where we started, the opening words of Artha Shastra by Chanakya, Om Namah Shukra Brahaspati Bhyam, the Devaniti and Rakshasa Niti, and many other Niti Shastras and Dharma Shastras, well examined by Kautilya or Chanakya, and then encoded into Artha Shastra, and then also presented in a much lighter format in Panchatantra. These two ancient texts form a very important part of the Indian knowledge systems that are very relevant and essential today and forever. That's in brief about what's actually written in Artha Shastra as well as Panchatantra in brief. Before I conclude this video, I would like to answer one reasonably common question. I think a couple of you have asked this question, which really caught me by surprise. The question was, is Chanakya a real person or a mythical person? Did that person ever existed or not? I think that's a very good question. Let's try to frame our question slightly different way. Despite his immense influence on Indian political and economic thought and the Panchatantra carved on the stones, some question whether Chanakya was a historical figure. This skepticism persists despite the existence of works like Artha Shastra and Panchatantra in public discourse since ages in Bharat, which are attributed to him and are still available today. On the other hand, Socrates, one of the most celebrated Greek philosophers of the Western world, left behind no direct writings. There is no single direct writing from Socrates. His ideas survive only through the accounts of his students like Plato, yet his historicity is rarely, if ever, questioned by Indians. Why this inconsistency? Why do we readily accept the existence of Socrates but doubt Chanakya, where you have the proof out there in public in the forms of Artha Shastra and Panchatantra? Shouldn't we apply the same even-handed approach to both of them? And if we are not doing so, and if we are saying that whatever the white-skinned people say, it's true, but then something of our own origin we doubt, I'm not asking you to be jingoistic. I hate that. All I'm asking is take a balanced approach. We need to respect Socrates as much as we respect Chanakya. Period. That's my personal stance that will never change. Wherever the knowledge comes from, we need to respect it as well as the person who gave us, be it Chanakya or Socrates.